Everyone, on this exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted to be talking with someone who has worked in television, film, and comics, and that is author Seth Sherwood. Seth, thank you for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you for having.
A pleasure, a pleasure. I know that you have actually a couple of videos that are out in the YouTube space talking through writing craft and some of those pieces of the process, and always interested in hearing authors' stories and how they landed where they did and where they are. So, what was your origin like? How did you get to this place?
It's funny because every time I go back and I try to sort of, do the find out where the lore began and like put it together. And it's kind of like little disparate things. Like when I was a kid, I noticed that I would always want to keep the make-believe playing going a little bit longer as other kids would tap out or, attention spans would drift. And I would adhere to story a little more. And granted, at that point it was probably like, oh, we're going to play Star Trek or we're going to play Star Wars during recess when I'm in like, second or third grade, and everyone just wants to run around and scream and pretend they're shooting lasers. And I'd be the one that's like, no, no, we have to go to the Death Star now. Like, you can't just leave the ship. What do you do? Like, they were all things. I was bringing the stories from all my favorite movies, cartoons, comics, whatever, and sort of, trying to force my playtime friends into sticking to a plot with me, which, so I think that was kind of the earliest genesis of it. And then not long after that, like fourth and fifth grade, is when I first discovered Dungeons and Dragons, which was, a fun way to start telling stories. And just every couple of years as I was growing, I'd find a new way that like to tell stories. Role-playing games were a big one for a long time because it was easy. Those games give you world building tools. You kind of cook up a plot. And I was playing D&D. I was playing the original tabletop version of Cyberpunk. I was playing a horror game that I absolutely loved called Chill. Um, and this is all like, late 80s, early 90s. And that really sort of gave me a framework to like, because once I started doing it, my friends wanted me to run the games. That's really what sort of gave me the framework to sort of start building stories. And, it just kind of built from there and, learning new things and learning new ways to tell stories until eventually by the time I was done with college, I was like, I think I want to try being a writer. So then I went back to college again for writing instead of just, art, which is where I started. But, from there it was just sort of, just every few years I'd try something different until eventually, that all sort of came together.
Love that you took it all the way back to childhood play as well. So it sounds like this
It's
was
important.
practiced early on. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Now, people out there will know you for film, television work, as I mentioned, Leatherface, who happens to be right over your shoulder over there as
Oh, it
well.
does. Yes. Yep.
Yes, yeah. Magnificently creepy storytelling, absolutely. Black Mass and the various episodes of television and things like that. How did you move from writing in that world to now writing in comics?
It's funny because comics were comics and cartoons were really where it started for me. I mean, obviously, like I'm of the age where Star Wars was the thing that like sort of broke my brain creatively, as a child, and had the movies, had the toys, had the comics. It was even back then in the 80s, it was just a full media assault. Um,
Mm.
and so the this is funny. Like no one ever. I mean, some people, comics people will clock this, but the original Marvel G.I. Joe comic book was a crazy cool bit of storytelling. Larry Hama, who did all the writing for that, he started by writing the little bio cards on the backs of the action figures, and Marvel was like, this dude is just making deep lore. Let's have him write the comics. And he had like I think it was like a 4 or 5 year run, like the only guy that really wrote those comics. And he would do these overarching storylines, and in a weird way, that was one of the first like lessons I had in like telling story in pieces and long form. So I've always had a love of comics. And I worked, back in the day for comicbookresources.com before,
Hmm.
what it used to be, not what it is now. And, I did a lot of their video content. So I was always meeting comics people, and comics have just always been a huge part of my life. But what's hilarious is that it's such a small world and it's so precise and it's so hard to get into. And I shot an interview with Mark Guggenheim once for CBR, and Mark Guggenheim said that he got into television so he could get into comics. And that was just such a such a telling thing to me. And it's, I always wanted to do comics, but of course I wanted to do movies, I wanted to do TV, and I foolishly thought, well, comics seems like a world you can break into, but it was, all just as hard. I did have to kind of go and build my resume in TV and film to make it easier to get comics because it's just, it's a little easier now, but before, like, you had to find an artist willing to help you do a pitch for free. It was, I got close many, many times. The editor on the book we're talking about, Kristen Simon, she, well, was at Image back in the day. And I think, had like two or three projects that she was really championing, but we just couldn't quite get them past the finish line. So I've known all these people in comics for years. I just, hadn't ever really gotten a pitch in with the publisher and gotten, into it until now, after the fact. But it was really sort of my first informative way of looking at how story is constructed, just because panel by panel, like when you write a screenplay, obviously you're writing action, but the best way to describe action is to break it down into little bits. When you look at a screenplay page, it's like you have to, the director and the DP are going to end up building it on screen, but when you're writing it, you need to focus on the action that's important for the story, and you have to think about it kind of like panels in a comic. It's like because in panel, like on a comic page, you get like five shots, basically, four to six shots, and it's like you got to pick up this important thing, you got to make this expression, you got to, you know, jump or do this action or whatever, and so that really was sort of like informing in a way of how to write screenplays efficiently.
Nice, nice. Always here for a good Larry Hama shout out as well. Absolutely.
Those
It's a good
comics were,
human.
I mean, that no, he really was. And I think that, that first issue of G.I. Joe, the silent issue, was like a,
Hmm.
story, it was a Snake Eyes centric issue, and there were no words in it, and yet it was a complete story. And he wrote a full script that was full of words for the artist, but none of them were on the page. Like that's like every screenwriter should go dig out that comic and read it and see how it breaks down, visual storytelling.
The book that you're working on and that you're sharing is Meet the Boyfriend, which brings together horror, comics. There's some manga influence that's happening here. So, before we talk genre, what did you want to accomplish in this story? What did you set out to do, that was kind of a creative drive for you?
What's funny is that this story has sort of gone through every medium at one point. It started as a movie idea, and then it sort of grew, and for a minute was a television idea, and then it went back to being a movie idea, and I was actually in the process of setting it up and getting made, and then COVID hit, and that sort of killed the momentum on it. And in retrospect, it was really hard to cast because it's twin teenage girls. It's very specific. Like I really wanted like the parents to be 90s horror kids. Like I really like, Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sarah Michelle Gellar would have been the perfect parents for it. And it was so specific with the casting, and then COVID hit and it made it really hard. And it's an idea that I had forever that wouldn't go away. And thinking about it in terms of manga, it's got the key elements. It's like if you have, you have the emotional young characters that allow you to have very expressive art. It's got all the horror, I love horror mangas, but I also, love uh, uh, I love the energy that you get with young characters and manga and anime. So it suddenly occurred to me that like, oh my God, like that might be the perfect way to do it. And at that point, again, Kristen Simon, the editor of the book, she was, she's running the manga line for Mad Cave, and so I pitched it to her, and she thought it was also a perfect fit, and we just went through the whole process of pitching up the chain and getting it in and finding an artist and knocking it out.
So you have some elements of horror there. You have, is it shoujin? Is that right?
Yeah,
So you have some of those pieces, kind of slice of life things as well. What was it like bringing all of that together into the comic?
it was so much fun because when it was a movie idea, it had to be so, it's 90 page script, and it's so precise. This format allowed me to be like, okay, I want to take 5 pages to show these two teenagers on a date, and
Mhm.
playing miniature golf, which I, as a tribute to Larry Hama, did silently. With no dialogue. Um, but it just it's a format that sort of allows you to play with tone. Like you can be scary 1 minute and like, silly rom-com the next. And it's just part of that, the milieu of manga is that like those tonal shifts are more allowed. And that's just, Eastern narratives in general are more fluid with their tone. And so that, I always like when I was pitching it as a movie, I'd have to pitch it as a horror comedy, but it wasn't quite funny enough to be a real comedy, but it also wasn't, so scary that it was hard horror. And that's like a hard sell. But like in this format, like I can hit those tones equally and go back and forth, and it makes sense and it feels right.
Cool, cool, yeah. Um, you were also talking about that expressive aspect of manga and how you can kind of get those tones and emotions through so very clearly with that. So we should probably mention the artist Elisa Pachetta. Uh,
Oh, she's
what was
she's amazing. Yeah. She's
I was gonna ask?
I mean I just feel so lucky. She'd done a few stuff for the publisher before, and like they knew her, and they gave me samples of a handful of artists that they thought would, work for it. And we had really great artists. There was one that I really liked, but it was hyper it, you can tell that he did a lot of like sci-fi and action manga. Like it was
Hmm.
very tight. It almost looked more like anime. It was just so tight and technical, and it was great. But then when I looked at Alyssa's stuff, it was so like expressive, and it had the bubbly cheesecake factor, but at the same time she had some stuff that was really dark and really fun. And so, she did like a few sample pages, and like it was literally what was in my brain. Like I don't know. I basically like every time pages came in, I had to like email her and thank her and tell her I loved everything she was doing. She just ran with it. Like I had to, I basically I gave her the only direction I gave her what was on the page, what I was writing story wise, and she just translated. I mean, it's funny because I'm American, obviously. She's Italian, so she'd be translating the script, reading it, through translation, and she's doing, a Japanese style, and through all that, she was just nailing it like perfectly. Um, and I just, everything she drew, I fell in love with. Like she just found a way to hit each of the characters so perfectly, which is tricky because the characters are twins who need to look the same because they're identical twins, but they have completely different styles and different demeanors. And she found a way to like, if you look at their facial features, they're the same, but they're so different. Like you're never going to confuse them on the page. And that's just such a amazing talent she has. And she's fast and, she's young. Like I'm lucky in every way that she jumped on it.
Yeah, I love that idea of global storytelling too. A North American writer, Italian artist working in a Japanese medium. I love that merging of comics.
Yeah, it's so much fun. And, there was, there for a minute I was worried about, cultural appropriation. Am I even allowed to do do this? I mean, my entire life I've grown up, with anime and manga, and like feeling like, oh, I wish I could do that, but I can't because I'm not Japanese. And, I think that guilt's a little bit there still, but at the same time, that was kind of what this line, in the comic press wanted to do is they wanted to have voices, different voices from the world. And manga has become so widespread that,
Mm,
of course a young girl in Italy is gonna like take to it and like feel like it speaks to her and like, start learning like it's like it's less. I gotta be careful here. I don't, I want to say the wrong thing, but it's almost like it's moved beyond being specifically cultural into being an actual like, global art movement, with its
mm.
obvious roots in Japanese narrative.
Pointing back to the origin, absolutely, and letting it breathe and expand. Love
Yeah. And if people hate me for it, I gotta let them have it.
it. Uh, well, I'm gonna spin out from my question about what horror allows you to do to be more of like, why horror and what do you keep coming back to it for? What is it about horror that keeps bringing you back? And then I'll ask you the same question about comics.
I think, I mean, the easy answer is I've always been a fan of genre, which is, like horror, sci-fi, crime, thriller. Like I love hard genre stories, or rather, I love real stories that hide inside of genre. And, when I first started out screenwriting, my manager was sort of known for being a person people went to seeking out horror material. So it, behooved me at first to really lean into my love of horror and give her, spec scripts. And I start getting jobs in that space. So those are the job offers that start coming to me. So, in a way, I, was, typecast as a horror writer a little bit because I do like other things, but at the same time, I've never had a problem with it because I love horror so much and it's always been my go-to. So, I'm pretty happy to be in that space. And it just it allows for so much varying in tone and experimentation, more so than any other genre. There's only so I love sci-fi, but there's only so many ways you can spin it. And
Mm,
it's kind of like what I was saying about like, Eastern narrators are more willing to like shift tone between being silly and being scary. Horror is so forgiving. You can have, A24 and neon movies on one end of the spectrum that are very, things like Hereditary or Night House or things that are very heady and like very allegorical. And then at the far other end of the spectrum, you can have just like, you know, Z grade gore movies that are just there for like exploitation and fun. And there's a whole spectrum between those two ends. And your average horror fan is going to like things on that full spectrum. I mean, you can get on social media and see people like saying, "Oh my God, I hate A24 films. Like horror should just be fun and gory." And then you have people who want to like praise A24 films who don't even want to admit to being a horror fan. And yet, most people I know who like horror, they're going to love that full spectrum of thing. And I don't know any other genre, any other fandom where you could be like, I want to see, somebody in a terrible rubber mask with blood squibs everywhere fighting cheerleaders. But then tomorrow I want to watch like a psychological family drama with a ghost. And it's there's such a wide range of things you can do and still be considered horror. And that's just fun. It's just infinitely open to like what you can do. And I even go a step further that like if Hollywood's sort of on fire now and burning up and horror continues to do fine. Like every year
mhm,
Variety or Hollywood Reporter is like, oh my God, horror is back. And like it never goes away. It's the one genre that consistently performs because people like it for that very reason. It's I always the way I always put it is it's like it's like a roller coaster ride. It's like you want the thrills, you want to be scared, but in the back of your head, it's still safe because the movie's not going to actually kill you. Um,
mhm.
I mean, a roller coaster is more likely to kill you than a movie, but it's just the idea of like we like being scared, we like being energized, we like the thrills, but we also know we can walk away from it and be fine.
Very true. Yeah, absolutely. So now I'm gonna go check out Midsummer and Werewolves in a women's prison camp. That's what I'm gonna do.
They're
Uh,
equally valid.
yes, yes. So same question with comics. What brings you back to them?
You know, I love, for me personally, I know the industry sometimes feels the loss of, one and done issues. And we're, given the way comics has shifted in the last few decades, obviously, the storytelling is sort of aimed at more of a trade market. We want to make sure we can get the collected edition in Barnes and Noble. And like I could, the background you're using behind you is nothing but collected trades.
Hmm.
Um, I think I love that. Like I love the idea of serialized storytelling, and comics does it so well. And it does it in a way that doesn't have the budget limitations of like what TV would have. Like it's there's something and it's again it's that freedom of expression. I love serialized storytelling, and the biggest example of that is obviously TV. But with TV, you've got a budget, you've got a line, and it's really hard to go outside of the box. You got to be a show like Breaking Bad to like really go out of the box and do something experimental. But even like, some of my favorite TV shows like, like Star Trek, Next Generation, they still had their pattern, like they knew what they would do within an hour, and they don't want to stray from that too much because that's not how TV advertising and marketing, like they feel like you got to have a thing and you got to stick within that. And when TV shows shift format too much, they lose viewers. But on the other hand, like comics has always had the ability to do serialized storytelling, but then do varied kinds of stories. For me, other than Larry Hama on G.I. Joe, the other big thing that like hooked me as a kid was, you know, Chris Claremont's like, decades long run on X-Men. And like, he would regularly change the format. If it were a TV show, it's like, okay, we blew up the mansion, now we're gonna go live in the Australian outback for a while. Or like, okay, oh no, we killed off half the team, we're gonna bring in new people. We're gonna do a story about that's like tight and personal about like racism and persecution, and now we're gonna go to space and fight demons. Like the ability to just sort of shift and tell different types of stories and shift your format. And like, he would have storylines that ran for a year, storylines that ran for 6 issues, storylines that ran for one. Just that varied, like, we'll do like 6 issues of a story about this, and then we're going to spend this one issue about Wolverine, in a park, like the idea that you could, the world that built, like nothing else can, no other format can really do that. And
Hmm.
that's I I don't want to be the old guy complaining because you'd see less of it in comics now. And I grew up on Marvel comics and always felt like I needed a degree in DC history to enjoy DC comics. And I feel like Marvel's kind of gone the same direction. But the book I'm seeing behind you in your background is Invincible. Like that's a great
Hmm.
example of, Kirkman did the same thing where he just, took his time and built a world, would have these huge world affecting story arcs and these very small personal stories as well. And like there's no other medium where you can do that in the long form. And so when I want to feel like I'm just, throwing myself into a world, I'll buy or dig out a stack of omnibuses and, spend a month, reading like a 100, 200 issue run of something. Like, what else can do that? Nothing else can do that.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate those insights into craft, and I know that as someone who has appreciated the medium, and someone who's worked across media, it's got to feel good and fulfilling at this point to have meet the boyfriend out there and to be creating in this world that you've loved for some time.
It is. Of course, I would love to do more, but it was a life goal more than anything else to be able to just, have a book published and have it out and hold it and, give it to people. That's, it's so much fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in that vein of wanting to do more, anything about where you'd like to go next in your writing path? And the other part to that is where can people go and find out more and follow along?
I mean, I'm not super busy on the social medias. I'm on Twitter, just my name on Twitter. Usually I'm whatever I'm working on, I'm tagging there. But I think as Hollywood continues to fall apart and burn, I've sort of shifted to just focusing on my own stuff. And Boyfriend is sort of like the first thing where I'm like, Hollywood just wants to chase IP. So I'm like, okay, cool. I guess I'll find a way to go make some IP. So I've done this book. I'm slowly pulling together the pieces to, make my own indie film. I've I'm developing a board game right now, a horror board game. Like
Nice.
I've just decided to purely focus on my own things. And, by day I'm in a writer's room for a video game. So that's become nice, solid, helpful work to keep me stabilized and really just sort of focus my own writing on my own things. And I've, told my reps that I'm gonna, stop chasing silly writing assignments. And, occasionally, I'll pitch on something if it's an IP that I love, but it's really hard in Hollywood right now when everyone just wants IP. So, I'm just sort of retracting and building my own IP and, well, building my own things and hoping that they become IP down the road. But I've
Smart,
found that
smart.
like I'm actually, enjoying writing in a new and exciting way to really just focus on my own stuff.
Cool. Cool. Well, may it be very fortuitous for you. May
Thank
the
you.
path
I
be very
appreciate
bright.
that.
Yeah. Uh, Anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to include before we close out?
No, I don't think so. No, I think that's the bulk of it.
All right, all right. Well, I appreciate what you're creating, and I'm always energized by people that are creating like a cross format. So you're mentioning doing a board game as well. So very exciting stuff. I love the creativity, and glad to have you back anytime.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I will come back as soon as there's a thing.